Okay, it says going live and it's spinning. It's not saying we're live yet. Okay. All right. I just see it loading up, so it should be live in a second now. All right, it says we're live. Alan, just confirm to me when you see it. Okay,
yeah,
cool.
We're good.
Yo, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the live stream. Thank you guys for waiting. Good to see everybody that's here. And let me make sure you guys can hear me, right? Okay. All right, yeah, I see it's on there. Just make sure everybody can hear me, and then we'll be good. Yeah. All right, let's go. Everybody's saying let's go. Yo, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the live stream tonight. We have a special live stream tonight because we got some special guests in the building. So first off, let me go ahead and introduce my guests, and then we'll get right into it. So here, I don't know how the view looks for you guys, but right below me should be Adam Coleman from Tru ID. Adam, go ahead and tell people about you a little bit.
Yeah, what's going on, man? Y'all know what it is. Your hometown hero, the real Adam Coleman of Tru ID Apologetics. And, just, an apologist out here, man. I started a podcast about 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, the Tru ID podcast. Tru ID stands for the real you Imago Dei, because I believe that the image of God is the foundation of our identity concept, And so I think, I'll probably get a little more into that later on. But I tend to, address a lot of objections to and questions about Christianity that have unfortunately been gaining some traction in the African-American context. And so I kind of center my ministry around that. And just a component of that is dealing with the kinds of issues that we're addressing tonight, because I do believe that we ought to be equipping people with a biblical framework to navigate the problem of evil and suffering, as that I think this kind of applies. So appreciate you having me, man. Thank you.
Yeah, no doubt, man. Yeah, thanks for that. So and then let's see. Oh yeah, I think my screen's backwards a little bit. Then next to Adam should be Alan Parr, right? Alan Parr. Alan Parr, everybody's saying that you're every time when we did the videos together, people are saying, oh, who's that young Denzel? Denzel comment a lot. But Alan, tell people a little bit about what you do and your channel and all that.
Yeah, great to be a part of this. John, thank you for setting all this up. John and I got a chance to get to know each other over the past year. Really love what you're doing here on the channel. I also have a YouTube channel. It's called The Beat, which stands for Biblical Encouragement and Truth. Essentially, what I do is answer a lot of frequently asked questions that people have about the Christian faith. Do some apologetics, but I wouldn't consider myself on the level that these guys are, but I do a lot of apologetics. I also do a lot of relationship videos from a biblical perspective, and basically just all things Bible teaching. Tomorrow, I'm getting ready to go through Song of Solomon's, put a little plug in there for that, for all those who are looking to do, take the relationship to the next level. So basically, that's basically what my ministry and YouTube channel is all about. So super excited to be here and looking forward to a great conversation.
Dope. Sounds good. And just so you guys know too, actually I'll introduce Carlton, then I'll go to it. So then above Alan should be Carlton. Carlton, go ahead and tell him your name and what you're interested in, what you do.
Yeah, sure. My name's Carlton. I'm actually a patron of John's, so I support What Do You Mean. I'm gonna also do that with Tru ID, and I don't know if The Beat, if you have one as well, but I really appreciate everything that y'all have done. I've been heavily blessed by all of you guys' ministries. I just have a passion for the word and for social justice, and I think I just have a unique perspective to lend to this today. So I'm looking forward to beholding marvelous things, man.
Yeah, and Carlton doesn't have a YouTube channel or nothing, but he's one of my patrons, and we meet with the patrons every month. So I'll talk to him a bunch of times, and I've heard his views on this stuff and all too. And I thought he'd bring a lot of value to this conversation, so that's why he's on as well. So so let's go ahead and get right into it too. So you guys know, for your questions and stuff like that, we'll be addressing at the end. We're going to tackle 4 questions that are common questions, and then you guys can send in your questions. Let us know what you guys want to hear our perspective on. And this conversation is tough for a lot of people. You know what I mean? Having a conversation about this, because of the tensions are so high right now, and whatever, and all the stuff that's going on in the world. And because of that, a lot of people have been reaching out to me too, or reaching out to all of us here. We talked about it before, but people's been asking us a lot of similar questions and stuff like that. And everybody's kind of trying to make sure they're not being offensive with their questions and stuff like that too. So I just thought it would be a good idea for us to do a live stream where we address some of these common questions that we keep hearing, because if a lot of people are texting us and asking us about it, then there's a lot more people who are trying to understand as well. One thing I'll say is that so what I realize about this kind of situation when it comes to racism, social justice, the riots, all of this stuff that's going on right now and people are talking about, is that this topic alone, I mean, with all of the different things combined, is really complex. It's not so simple as it might sound. And so I know a lot of people don't like that, because we're kind of in a soundbite culture where we just want these slogans and these sound bites to respond to people and to give our point of view and all that. But I just want people to know that, like, for me, you know, thinking about all this stuff and all, and hearing people's different perspective, I realize there's a lot of different people from a lot of different positions, even in this conversation, even like with the riots, right? You have everything from Antifa, their point of view, to the rioters, the looters, you know, to some, I mean, there's just so much going on right now. So, with those sound bites, though, I think that a lot of time they lead to miscommunications because they dumb down a lot of complex ideas. And because of that, people end up talking past each other. So whenever I hear, you know, like my brothers and sisters who are white talking with black brothers and sisters, that a lot of the time they're talking right past each other, and we don't, not even talking about the same thing. For example, with racism, that's a term that they're using different a lot of the time. So that's why there's a lot of miscommunication. So the point of this live stream today is to address some of those things for the miscommunication, so that way we can have a better understanding of each other, instead of us trying to get to a solution where everybody's going to agree. That's not necessarily the point of this video. It's more understanding than it is for agreement from everybody, because it doesn't really matter what position you take. People are going to be ticked off you didn't take the other one, and that's just how it is. So, all right. So we'll go ahead and get started. The first question that I think a lot of people are wondering too is, why is it that you have like a lot of commentators who will say racism doesn't exist, and then you have a lot of commentators who say that racism does exist? And it seems like they both quote statistics and they're talking past each other. So my first question, I guess, for the panelists too, is why is it that you think that we're missing each other? And some people will say that it exists, and some people say that racism doesn't exist. What are you guys' thoughts on that? Go ahead and start with who's ready to go? Alan?
Oh man. Okay. Well, I guess I'm up first.
Yeah.
No pressure, right? You know, I think it really depends on, once again, how we define the word racism. And you know, I talked about this a couple of days ago on my channel, but basically, if you are defining racism as a particular race having negative opinions or speaking negatively, or having biases or preferences or prejudices against another race, well, therefore, all races can essentially be racist, or racism can exist for all races. But that's not necessarily how I define the word racism. I define racism based on the history of what happened in our country. And what we've seen in our country is one particular race being able to dominate, control, oppress, and depress another race. And we'll just get specific. Historically, in our country, the United States, the Caucasian race has, through slavery, through all the civil rights issues and things that we've seen, has been in positions of power, and they have been able to dominate and oppress the African-American race. Now, I want to be very, very clear. That does not mean that white people are racist. That does not mean that. So please, let's not take everything to the absolute. What I'm saying is, historically in our country, there have been evil people who happen to be white, evil people, okay, who were in positions of power, who used that power to oppress African Americans, segregate them, keep them from going different, you know, you go to this bathroom, go to that, you drink this water fountain, I drink, all that stuff. And because there's been very few situations where African Americans have been in that level of power to where we have been able to oppress another race with our power, that's the reason why a lot of people feel like, well, there's not been a lot of racism from an African American perspective, although there have been biases, there have been prejudices, there have been preferences. No one's saying that Black people can't say negative things about whites or have an opinion that's not godly and biblical about another race. I'm talking about oppressing another race with the use of power. And that is not something we've seen quite a bit in our culture.
Yeah, and I think so from conversations and stuff that I had too, I've noticed that people are. It's not necessarily that people are monolithic even on this definition, right? Some people can think prejudice, being prejudiced or having a preference is racist. You know what I mean? When you talk to a lot of people, and so then they're like, So, anyways, so the point of this is to say that there's different perspectives on racism, and that leads to a lot of the miscommunication. So I think that that's something that's important for a lot of people to be aware of. Adam, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's actually kind of going where I wanted to go with it as well. I think I'm gonna be unhelpful by muddying the waters a little bit, in the sense that first of all, I agree with Alan Parr that there's obviously different definitions, and I think what happens is when somebody like frames racism in the way that Alan Parr just did, then I think that, and I just try to be explicit. I think sometimes white people feel like the deck is being stacked against them because most people haven't really investigated these issues. They don't know that what Alan Parr just described is a legitimate definition of racism that you find in the literature, in scholarly literature. I'm saying it's not just Black people kind of trying to, nuance their way out of being culpable for prejudice, right?
Oh, and on that note, just real quick, the first time I ever heard that definition was from a white girl who was trying to talk to me about racism, and she said you have to have prejudice plus power. So, but she was referring to scholarly work and all that sort of stuff too. So, just to throw that in there.
Right. I mean, and I think, and so sometimes people are like, well, Adam, how come you didn't push back when so defined racism that way? It's like, well, you have to understand that what Alan Parr just described, for example, is a legitimate rendering of what racism means. Now, my opinion, in some ways, I feel like the term racism is in some ways outdated, and I think it's somewhat outdated because there's so many different ways that it gets used. It's almost better to actually describe what it is that you're pointing at. So, for example, so many people think, like, when they think about racism, they think of, like, the 1960s with Bull Connor and dogs and water hoses and people being beat with sticks and things like that. Like, that to them is racist or racism. And so if they're not the ones who are out here burning a cross in somebody's yard, then they think, well, I'm not racist. But I think that, one other aspect of racism is if you have erroneous negative beliefs about another people group. I'm saying you may not have like hatred towards them, exactly, or you may not necessarily have like some sort of, you may not be ready to just kind of ride out and shoot a Black person. But if you've got these erroneous ideas that in some way or another denigrate another group of people, then I would consider that to be racist. You know what I'm saying? And so one example would be, you think, you might not say it, you might think, all Black people are lazy. Or you might think that, well, on average, Black people are less intelligent or something like that. You might have Black friends, you might have, whatever, you know what I'm saying? But if you believe something erroneous about, and not just Black people, but minorities or whatever other race, you know what I'm saying? If you believe that, some erroneous things about them, then I think that would be under the umbrella of what would be racism. And I don't want to be too long with it, but I think people would do themselves some good if they study the history of how that racial animus has changed and morphed over time. You know what I'm saying? That isn't just this one fixed emotion-based idea, but it's had many different expressions. Certainly, probably the most prominent, I would say, would be what Alan Parr described.
Yeah, and I would say, see, this is how it's true that people aren't all monolithic just because they're Black, right? Because I wouldn't define racism that way. I don't think it's, and this is where we can discuss too, but I would think that in my mind, it's kind of simple like this. Racism to me is that thinking that somebody because of their skin color is less than you, right? Or you're superior because of your skin color, or you hate other people because of their skin color. So it has to do with that kind of mindset, because I think prejudice, where I'd make the distinction where I say, if you're prejudiced, it's like, it's like preferences, or it could just be like stereotypes or whatever. That's prejudice, but I don't necessarily see that as racist, because I think at some level, how our brains are wired, we make snap judgments pretty quick, right? And when we do that, sometimes it can be prejudice, you know what I mean? But it doesn't necessarily make it racist unless there's the issue of the other race being inferior. That's my thought on it. Carlton, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I really appreciate what you said there, Adam, because a lot of times when I have this kind of conversation with some of my white brothers and sisters, I think a lot of times getting the definitions right is just something that doesn't happen. And so we got to make sure we're explicit with what we mean. So just how you said, I think it's a really nuanced subject. So you talked about, I have a bunch of different I's that I think of. And so one is sort of ideologies, then intentionalities, individuals, and institutions. And a lot of times I think with my white brothers and sisters, there's this emphasis on racism being an individual to individual thing, ideologies, and then like having racial malice or animus. So a lot of times I'll use this example. I remember I was at the National Science and Faith Conference in Dallas in 2019. And I asked this question to the scientists about like the law of causality in the universe and all this other stuff. And the scientists were like, oh man, it's a great question that you asked. And so afterwards, I'm wearing my hoodie, backwards snapback, and the 75-year-old white man comes up to me and he's like, oh man, like I was wondering, like, what was a little black boy doing asking a smart question like that up there? And me, I was kind of off because I didn't go off on the guy. I was like, it's just the vestiges of the time that this guy grew up in. But he meant that as a compliment. He really thought he was like, man, that's a smart black guy. But,
pat on the back.
Yeah, but I think even though there wasn't any racial animus there, that was still some racist stuff that he said, kind of presuming that because I'm black, I can't be intelligent. So I think that's an example of there being no racial animus or racial intent there, racial malice, but still having something of a racist ideology there. You know what I mean? And so kind of distinguishing between the two, how there can be a racist ideology, like you said, a set of beliefs that are erroneous, that are influencing the way that you perceive the world. And I think another thing, kind of how John said, why do we think that sometimes racism exists and some people don't, is I think a lot of times the experiences that we have affect the way we view the world. So if race doesn't really play as much of a factor in my life, you know what I mean? It's not going to be something that I take into account. It's like, I don't think about how much the world is made for right-handed people because I'm right-handed. You know what I mean? Now, if I'm left-handed, like if I go to a desk, I just sit down and write at it. I don't think, man, I wonder what it'd be like for somebody who's left-handed here. You know what I mean? Or does that make that person guilty? Does that make them like a terrible person? No, it's just something that I doesn't really compute. So when people are talking about it, I think what matters is, what is my response to that person? Am I going to listen to them? Am I going to try to look at it from their perspective? Or am I going to just operate under the mindset that if it doesn't exist in my world, it doesn't exist at all?
Yeah, can I come back on that right quick? Because you said something really important. I think you said something about maybe it was more than three, but you mentioned a couple of different I's.
Oh yeah.
And I want to say you said something about individuals or something like that.
Yeah.
All right. So no, I want to make a point on that. In answering the question in terms of why. Now this may make some people mad, but I'm just gonna we're having an honest conversation. I'm saying, but in terms of why some people don't accept this idea that racism is real, I think it in part has to do with the fact that in the Western world, the modern Western world, there's this notion of individualism. Yeah. And I'm talking amongst Christians. So, this brand of individualism that we see prominent in Western ideology is not biblical. You know what I'm saying? It's if you read the scriptures are communicate a notion of that where we're far more intertwined with one another than the way that most Westerners think. You know what I'm saying? It's not, the Bible's not an individualist, set of literature, right? So with that being said, I think that humankind, and this kind of gets into the Imago Dei thing, because I've got a whole teaching on my channel, but an aspect of the Imago Dei is that mankind was endowed with this collective project to harness and steward the world in a way that reflects God. I'm saying we were created, to be with one another in some sense, right? Now, here's where I'm going with it. I think part of the reason why some people have difficulty with acknowledging racism today is that their self-concept is in some ways tied to the collective in a way. So they want to believe, for example, that America had racism in the past. Like it was kind of like a cold that we got over. And so when somebody like me comes along and says, no, we didn't have a cold, we had bronchitis, and we still needed some medicine, then that detracts from this idea of what they want America to be. The fact of the matter is, I'm sorry, y'all, America is full of depraved folks just like anywhere else. Now, I do believe that there are some ideals and concepts of a biblical nature woven into our foundation that has allowed for us to prosper and, align ourselves, or at least be proximate to God's, standard of morality in ways that we otherwise would not have. And I'm certainly not taking that away. But what I'm saying is, if somebody says, to me, hey, I'm rocking, I'm doing this on July 4th, Or you know what? Actually, let's be real. I'm not trying to cost you any subscribers, John, but I got to go in. You know what I'm saying? Let's talk about Colin Kaepernick. Now we can debate on whether or not it was okay for him to protest the flag. That's not my issue.
And Adam, just make it quicker if you can, so we can keep going.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you're good. No, but go ahead.
I can sum it up in 30 seconds. So even if we disagree with the flag, when you investigate the national anthem, you do find that in that stanza it refers to the hireling and the slave. You know, it's in there, whether we like it or not, because in the War of 1812, it is the case that some Africans in America did fight with the British with the hopes of getting their freedom, having been enslaved in America. That's a fact. But I think it rubs people the wrong way, because if you've taken your national identity and in some way have kind of moved the Imago Dei off center in your self-concept, then your national identity is driving how you feel about yourself. And what I would encourage people to do is dislodge yourself from that. I'm saying shave off the rust of nationalism, you know what I'm saying, and make sure that the foundation of who you are is that Imago Dei. And then I think that people will be more open to, you know, this notion that America is still struggling with race, because they won't take it as like a personal shot at them. You see what I'm saying? So I truncated that some, because I don't want to take too much time, but that was the gist of where I was trying to go.
Okay. All right, cool. No, thanks for you guys' perspective on that. So the next question, I think, so we can spend a little time on this, because I think it's important to talk about the common slogans and how those kind of lead to or reveal miscommunication, right? I do understand, I think, both sides on this. I mean, I hope so too, and we'll talk about it though too. But what do you guys think so a lot of people will say things like all lives matter, or what about the black on black crime, or why aren't there riots when white people get killed, and so on. And this to me shows that there's a miscommunication here when they say that. So let's go ahead and just start with like the first one, all lives matter. What is it when people say that? What do they mean? Is what I'm going to say first. And then when Black people hear that, or Black Lives Matter supporters hear that, what do they hear? So I guess I'll start with what they mean. What it seems like they mean is they're saying Black lives don't just matter, all lives matter, you know? And so they're saying that this is in response to what I would assume would be something like Black people, just because they're Black, like, it's not that they're a special class, they're saying all lives matter. And they feel like what Black Lives Matter is saying is that like, they don't care about people who aren't Black. In other words, I think that's kind of the mindset. What do you guys think? Do you guys agree with that kind of assessment, or what do you think that some people say when they say that? And then we'll go ahead and say what Black people hear when they say that. So go ahead, Alan.
Okay, yeah, I had to put my hand up for this one because I got some stuff to say about this one, and I'll keep it short. I want to see if it's possible if I could share. Oh no, you disabled the screen sharing. Okay, no big deal. No, it's cool. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Okay. I can summarize it. So basically, I saw this post on Instagram the other day, basically by Michael Pittman, and he put a post up there, and it said something to the effect of saying all lives matter is like your house is burning down, and the fire department comes and they are spraying down your house, and all of your neighbors come out of your neighborhood and say, hey, our houses matter too. Our houses matter too, right? But the problem is, yeah, your house does matter. But right now, your house is not on fire. Right now, my house is on fire. So how inappropriate would it be if my house was burning down, right? And the fire department came to my house and sprayed it, and all the people in my neighborhood said, hey, spray our houses too, because our house matters too, right? No, your house is not on fire right now. Mine is. And that's basically, that's a good way that I could really help my friends understand. When we say Black Lives Matter, we're saying, hey, our house is burning down right now, and it matters, right? So our young men are being killed and murdered by the police in broad daylight. So our lives matter, but we're not saying that your life doesn't matter, or if your house was burning down. So for instance, to be fair, if there was a host of police officers who were being killed, which there are, and somebody posted and said, Blue Lives Matter, think about this logically. How inappropriate would it be for me to post, yeah, Black Lives Matter too? Like, we're not talking about that. A police officer just lost his life, right? He just lost his life. Let's weep with those who weep. Let's mourn with those who mourn. Let's say, yes, you know what? Blue lives do matter because this dude was a cop. He lost his life and in the line of duty. And we need to take this moment and acknowledge that blue lives matter. It would be inappropriate for me to put up, yeah, I'm sorry for him, but yeah, black lives matter too. All lives matter. It's just inappropriate. And I could go on, but
yeah, I think, no, that's good. I think, and I think what you said, I mean, it's important because I think you guys got to remember too, when we communicate with people, it's not as much what we say, but it's what they hear when we say it, right? So it sounds dismissive in that aspect too. And, I don't, I'm not trying to say, because the point here is about understanding is what I want to say. So it sounds dismissive if it's kind of like if you're at a rally where people are, a rally for to overcome breast cancer or something, and somebody's like, hey, well, what about COVID-19 or what about athlete's foot or whatever? That's a bad example, athlete's foot, but you know what I'm saying. It sounds dismissive. It sounds as if you're not trying to engage with it and you're just dismissing it. So now, whether it's true or not, that's not the point that I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is just to provide understanding for people of what they hear a lot of the times when we use those kind of response slogans like that.
Can I add to that? Or
Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I'll be brief this time. I'm a son of a preacher, so you gotta forgive me. I'll try to shorten myself. But just 2 quick points. First of all, I do think that for whatever reason, people have characterized this notion of Black Lives Matter as if people are saying like Black Lives Matter only, when in reality what we're saying is Black Lives Matter too. Black Lives Matter also, right? The notion is that unfortunately, we have a history in this country of Black lives not being seen as valuable as others, and we don't want to return to that sort of thing. Now, here's the thing: it's like Dr. King said that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, right? And so, one thing that we have to understand is that you don't want narratives of one group being devalued to become prominent in the culture, because then it does lead to a swelling of abuses. Just think about the Holocaust. You didn't just have Hitler just, yoking people up all of a sudden one day, and putting them in concentration camps. No, that came after decades of priming the public against Jews. You know what I'm saying? Because you had notions of Darwinism coming in there and having this social outworking and so on and so forth. But to shorten the point, after a progression of denigrating Jewish people, that then set the stage for them carrying out what they call the final solution and so forth. So it's very important that, narratives matter. And so anytime, you have this notion of Black Lives Matter, it's not just like, oh, we're just mad. No, we want to make sure that the narrative is out, that we are of value, just like everybody else.
Gosh, yeah, that's good. And let's go to the next question real quick. And Carlton, if you want to add something to that, do you want to add something real quick, or?
I could just add a little something, if that's all right. Yeah, because I think y'all pretty much encapsulated it. Because I was going to talk about how a lot of times I think my white brothers and sisters, when they hear Black Lives Matter, they put a parenthetical only in front of it, and that's what they hear is only Black Lives Matter, instead of also, like he said, hearing Black Lives Matter too. Because it's basically it's a response to the systemic devaluing of Black lives that seems to happen in America. And so I think that all lives matter is a biblically true statement, but it's because that statement is true that the statement Black Lives Matter is true. And then I think also just because there's a conflating of that sentence with like the organization, I think too. And so I think a lot of times they might associate, if you say that you stand with everything that particular organization stands for. And so I think it's important to, like you said, distinguish between certain things, distinguishing between, let's say, the organization, or I'm not even sure if it would be an organization or whatever you want to call that, versus the actual movement or what the sentiment expresses. Because I think people mean different things, and I think they conflate the two a lot.
That's good.
And you know what? And to your point, just 10 seconds. I'm sorry, John. But it's you're right. People conflate the sentiment with the organization. What I would just ask people to do is that people who are like me, disgusted by the organization itself, ask yourself, what is it about this slogan that this organization that we all agree is heinous? What is it about this slogan that resonates with so many people that has become an international phenomenon? Ask yourself, why, what is the reality that it's pointing to that allows for it to resonate with so many people, and then maybe address that reality. That would be.
That's good stuff, man. That's good.
Good. Okay, so and we won't spend too much time on these slogans, but just kind of give some quick kind of thoughts how to think about it. What is it when people say, well, what about black on black crime? What is it where people feel like they, they're not listening or they don't get the point, or where are people talking past each other is the better way to put it.
Okay, so I'm going to start on the black on black crime. So we just answered this one a couple of days ago. A lot of times our white brothers and sisters will say, hey, I see that you all are so angry when, a police officer kills a young black man, but I don't see you all as upset about black on black crime in your own community. Like, why don't y'all fix your own family issues first, and why don't I see you getting that upset about that? So here's what I have to say about that. Typically, when you have black on black crime, it's typically somebody that you would expect to commit that crime. They're a thug, they're a drug dealer. Let's just call it what it is. They're a thug, they're a drug dealer, they're a criminal. So what do dogs do? Dogs bark. What do criminals do? They commit crimes, right? So it's not a shock when a drug dealer shoots somebody in a low socioeconomic community who owes them some money. That's not a shock. That's not a, oh my gosh, I can't believe he did that, because he's a criminal. He's a thug. That's what they do, right? We're not expecting him to do or her to do anything different. So therefore, yes, we should get upset at a life that's being lost, but we're not shocked at it, right? The issue with the police brutality is that this is a group of people who have taken an oath to protect and serve us and to carry out justice. When that goes against what they say they stand for, then that is the reason why many of us get so angry, because we're like, hey, this person said that they're here to protect and serve us, and yet he's got his knee on this guy's neck and says, I can't breathe. I don't care. I'm going to keep it there. That's where the anger comes in. It's when something happens that's unexpected, beyond what somebody says they stand for. And for me, that's why I get angry about it.
And just to reiterate here, that was a good point, Alan. And to reiterate for you guys that are just getting here too, the point of what we're talking about here, it's okay if you guys disagree, but what we're trying to do is to bridge understanding amongst Christians, because there's a lot of miscommunication, a lot of people talking past each other. So just so you guys know, that's what the point is here too. So, okay, go ahead. Who was it? Carlton.
Yeah, I'll say something. Yeah, I think because part of it, it's kind of, I don't know, I feel like sometimes the black on black crime, or a lot of these slogans are kind of like, you made that video about, so who made God, and that's kind of, it's supposed to be like a mic drop, like walk away, nothing else matters. You know what I mean? But I feel like part of it is because it's kind of a misnomer a little bit, because it's almost like, I feel like it makes it mistakes something for pathology that is really something of proximity. So, like 93% of black homicides are at the hands of black people, just a fact. 84% of white homicides are at the hands of white people. And I'm just using homicides as an example. But I feel like, we don't hear the term white on white crime. You know what I mean? One, it doesn't really fit a narrative, but two, it's not black on black or white on white, it's neighbor on neighbor. The fact is that people commit crimes where they're comfortable. And a lot of it just has to do with, you're talking about redlining, or a lot of stuff is that a lot of our neighborhoods are still really segregated. You know what I mean? And then, so I feel like part of that is just, that's part of the statistic. So I feel like sometimes diverting to that is just like that. It's sort of a diversion that doesn't address the issue we're talking about. But then two, I think also, I think even scripture, and this isn't to say that black people are all poor or black people all have this defeatist mentality or anything like that, but a lot of times just with the history of the country and the recognizing that, there are certain racial discrepancies with respect to poverty, scripture even recognizes that there's a link between poverty and crime. So it's not so much something that's racial as much as sometimes there could be something that's poverty driven. I think it's in Proverbs 30 where it talks about, don't give me, let me look, it says, feed me with the food that is needed for me, lest I be full and deny you and say, who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal and profane the name of God. In Proverbs 7, where it talks about people don't despise a thief who steals because he's hungry, right? But yet, he's still gonna have to pay sevenfold when, talking about comparing that with an adulterous person who commits adultery. But all that just to say, I feel like one, it's sort of a misnomer, and then two, it just kind of diverts from the main issue that we talk about. Nobody's saying that we can't tackle both. And then the other thing, somebody's like, I don't see you guys being upset about that. I'm like, well, you probably haven't been in those communities, because people are upset about that. People do speak out against it all the time. So just saying like, I don't see it, it's like, well, are you going there? are you, what black leaders are you listening to that are like, yeah, black crime? You know what I mean? Like, I feel like it's just kind of disingenuous and, an attempt to kind of divert. Those are just some of my thoughts on it, though.
Yeah, I mean, to that last point, I mean, I think that, if the only time you bring up black on black crime, or if the only time you bring up abortion in the black community is a counterpoint in response to somebody making a claim about justice, then that would suggest to me that you don't really care about black on black crime, or you don't really care about abortion. You're more so interested in using it as kind of like a pawn in your chess game of argumentation. And I think that both of those issues are far too serious to do that, so I think people need to really reflect on that. With that being said, I mean, to your point about white on white crime, I mean, yeah, I mean, we offend, criminal or criminals criminalize, people that are in proximity to them. So it would kind of be like, terrorism. Ever since 2001, terrorism has been a big issue, right? So what if, Donald Trump is giving a speech on terrorism or something like that and building a wall, and I say, well, all right, what about white on white crime? Right? I mean, you're far more likely to be killed by a neighbor, a white neighbor, than you are a terrorist, right? You would say, well, yeah, I mean, that's probably true, but nevertheless, we need to put up a wall. We need to put some measures in place to protect our borders. Well, exactly. So it's the same way when people say things like black on black crime. I mean, obviously there's black on black crime going on, but that doesn't mean that we don't need to put measures in place so that the particular issue that we're dealing with isn't addressed. You know what I'm saying? And the other side, I'll just kind of leave it at this, is that when black people commit crimes, they go to jail. You know what I'm saying? The statistics are very clear that our system is very good at sending black folks to jail. They got that part down pat. You know what I'm saying? However, when it comes to these high profile cases where a white officer or a white person, like in the Arbery case, has done something heinous, it's 50-50. We don't know if justice is going to be brought about. And so that's why we have to raise our voice, because we're so unsure that the system will truly carry out justice the way that it ought to. So I would just throw that at people, just something to consider.
Okay, all right. And another popular slogan, we'll try to make this one quick, guys, so we can get to the rest of the stuff and get to questions. But it says, the common question we often hear is like, why aren't there riots when black people get killed? And because they'll say there are riots when black people get killed by the cops, you don't throw riots when white people get killed with the cops. Who wants to touch that one first?
I guess I'll touch it. Yeah, so I think part of it, and when I speak about this, I just want to say the loss of black life or white life in the eyes of God are just equally abhorrent. No human life should be lost. And I don't think there's any Christian, forget if it's black Christian, that's biblically consistent that would say that one matters more than the other in the eyes of God. So with that being said, I think that's just the first thing that we want to say. I think what makes certain profile or certain cases cause more riots is because, like I said, the same way when I think in the minds a lot of times with some of my white brothers and sisters, there's this really big emphasis on individualism and sort of interpreting events in a vacuum. A lot of times black people, because we learn and we know about the history of the country, it takes place and we interpret these events in a really broader historical context that has constantly deprived people of justice. And so when we see examples of that, it carries more of a weightiness to it, especially when a lot of the deprivation of justice isn't just historical, but still takes place today. And so I think that's a lot of the times why, let's say if somebody like a white person is killed, doesn't mean that their death doesn't matter. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't protest it if it's the unjust taking of life, because the unjust taking of any innocent life, should be fought against, just with us as Christians. But I think it just takes a different weightiness when you look at it in the context of the history of the country and the injustices that still take place today. I think that's part of the reason why.
I 100% agree. I mean, I agree that if you're in a community where you see these incidents as being isolated incidents, then I can see why you would wonder, well, man, what's the big deal? You know what I'm saying? But when you understand that the kinds of abuses that we're seeing at the hands of these officers and others is actually just an extension of a broader root system of abuses that are a prominent experience in our community. You know what I'm saying? So like, just real quick, I mean, my brother-in-law, right? He was pulled over for speeding a couple of years ago. And, normally you expect for them to ask, license, registration, or, why I pulled you over. The first words out of this police officer's mouth to my brother-in-law was, have you paid your child support lately? Right? I mean, now how are you supposed to interpret that? I mean, and, that's obviously disrespectful. And I can sit here for another hour and give a bunch of other different, examples. But my point is that there's this robust experiential framework that we bring to the table when we look at incidences like these, So it's not just isolated. You know what I'm saying? We have, and I think people have to really understand it. So why do people march and all that kind of stuff? Because we're saying, look, we've been telling y'all for how long? And now that it's on video, it's like, see, this is what we've been telling you. And yet, even with video, it still might be the case that people get off. And so, therefore, when people don't feel heard, then they feel they have to raise their voice. And I think that's what these marches are, and things of that nature.
Yeah. All right. All right, let's real quick. What is some and then we're going to get to questions here. I'll try to get through these really quick so we get to questions. But what's some biblical advice that you guys would give for how Christians should think about racism and injustice? Let's go ahead and start with Carlton. I know you got scriptures.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question one more time, please?
Oh yeah, just what's the biblical advice that you would give Christians of how to think about racism?
Think about racism and injustice.
Yeah, I just think you can quote scriptures or whatever.
Yeah, I just think a lot of it just has to do with how we view justice. You know what I mean? And I think a lot of times what causes these discussions to be difficult is even amongst white and Black Christians, or because we have the same authority, but we're not viewing reality the same way or experiencing the same reality. So I think sometimes ultimately, I guess, establishing the reality of certain things, that injustice is, once we establish that that is a real thing, then I think there's certain biblical principles. So I think of the importance of justice in a biblical worldview. I think, if you go to Psalm 82, verses 3-4, where literally God is speaking to the magistrates of the land. And he says, give justice to the weak and the fatherless, maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute, rescue the weak and the needy, deliver them from the hand of the wicked. So literally justice on behalf of the marginalized. I think if you go to Isaiah 1:16, I'm not even trying to say, I think these should frame. So it says, learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless, plead the widow's cause. Isaiah 10, 1-3, where it says, woe to those who decree iniquitous decrees, and the writers who keep writing oppression, to turn aside the needy from justice, and to rob the poor of my people of their right, that widows may be their spoil, and that they make the fatherless their prey. Like all of these things that are constantly talking about, how justice, I think we got to remember justice is a part of God's character. And so I think as Christians, we have a biblical mandate to correct oppression whenever we see it. So I understand maybe the intellectual issue is, well, are people being oppressed or not? And, I'm perfectly fine having that kind of conversation. But I think from a biblical perspective, once we do, whether it's through civic engagement, protests, however, I think it's clear that there are, different biblical mandates on how we should approach justice, especially on behalf of the marginalized. That's just a little bite size. I can go deeper, but
no, absolutely, yeah. That is important too. Is discussing justice and then how justice is handled is critical too. But yeah, okay. Adam, did you have something you want to say about that?
Well, yeah, just real quickly. I think that I agree with everything that Carlos just said, and I think it's a matter of discipleship, right? I think that people honestly don't know where this concept of pursuing justice is situated within the life of the believer. And I think that what we need is in the church, and I would just encourage pastors and leaders and so forth to, really walk through the scriptures and understand, what does the Bible say about justice? Because the thing of it is, I think a lot of justice talk and activities has been hijacked, by worldly organizations and maybe, liberals or whatever you want to say. It's like that language and those initiatives, those kind of justice oriented initiatives have been hijacked by the world, when really they belong to the biblical worldview, right? You can't read through the prophets without seeing a constant admonition to the people of God towards justice. Or even Matthew 23, I'll just read very briefly and get out your way. But Matthew 23, chapter 23, verse 23, woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites, you give 1/10 of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former, right? And so people maybe take Jesus' words there as being, again, isolated, but you have to understand he's articulated a prophetic tradition that runs throughout the entirety of the Old Testament. God is concerned about justice, and we should be too, right? And so I think that when people understand that it's not something that belongs to the world, but it's something that flows naturally from the character of God, naturally from the biblical worldview. And if we disciple people in that, then I think they'll be more likely to engage in wherever you're in sphere of influence to bring about godly justice.
Yo, could I just piggyback off that real quick? I'm not trying, but
Yep.
I think it's important. Yeah, even in Matthew 23:23, where you have that threefold mentioning, and like you said, it goes through, you go to Micah 6:8, where literally God is saying, what is good, right? What the Latin called the summum bonum. He says, and what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God? And so you see that justice, loving mercy, where it says kindness, and then walking humbly for your God with faithfulness. Like, literally throughout scripture, where it says Proverbs 31:8-9. Let me see if I can just get there. Here we go. It says, open your mouth for the mute, for the rights of all who are destitute. Open your mouth, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and needy. Like, I feel like we need to, combine the Christianity of Billy Graham with the Christianity of Martin Luther King. Like, combine John 3:16 with Matthew 25. Like, the horizontal bar of righteousness the vertical bar of righteousness with the horizontal arm of justice, just like how the cross is. Like, I feel like that's something that's really lacking in the current, Christian landscape. But I think that's how we really can cultivate the culture for the gospel, man.
Yeah. And, I'm sorry, Alan, do you have something real quick?
Well, no, I only thing I'll add to that, because I think you guys really summarized it well, but I like that last scripture that you talked about where it says, defending and speaking up for, right? And I think that, that's one of the ways that I would encourage, all of us to, to try to put an end to racism, or at least minimize it, which is whenever we see something happening that is not right, or there's an injustice happening, or we're in a conversation with people and we hear people making racist slogans or, statements about other, like, who's going to be that person that stands up for the person that is in need of justice at that time? Or, because none of us want to do that. We all want to kind of stay safe with our friends or our country club friends or our neighborhood friends or our small group or whatever, our people in our neighborhood. But who's going to be that person that defends and stands up, essentially like the Good Samaritan? Like, are you going to be that person that nobody expects? Because you expect the Levite and the priest to take care of them, but you don't expect the Samaritan, right? So are you going to be that person when everybody around you is like you and they're all talking and say, oh yeah, Black people are this. Oh yeah, they're this way. Mexicans are this. Are you going to be like that Samaritan, that person that people don't expect to stand up and say, wait a second, that's not been my experience. Or wait, that was a racist comment. Did you just hear yourself? Like, most of us don't want to do that, because then we're going to people are going to think we're weird. They may not invite us back to their home, and it just makes everything weird. But Christians are called to make a stand against that.
Absolutely. And one thing I'll just say, slightly related, and then we'll get to you guys' questions. So you guys go ahead and start throwing your questions down in the chat. But one thing I want to say too, and you guys know if you watch my videos, I'm always trying to get it back to the gospel, because I think that's what matters. When us as Christians, when it comes to our identity, right, our ultimate identity, I think that a lot of these problems, I mean, of course, like racism and all this stuff is a sin problem. And the reason why it's a sin problem too is because we have different things that we put our identity in to get value, right? And so when we put our value in, our race or anything, you can even work this way with religion, of course, put your value in your ultimate value in your race or your religion or something like that, you automatically are going to start looking down on other people that don't have that, because that's going to give you value. It's going to make you feel valuable. So that's why I think that Christianity does provide an adequate solution to racism, because in Christianity, our ultimate value isn't based off of what race we are or anything like that. Instead, it's based off of what Christ did and who he says that we are, right? And so because of that, that solves this problem. We can't feel better than another person, because we know that we're all created in the image of God. And that's not where we get our ultimate value from anyway. So it doesn't become a thing that we have to identify with and then have to punt other people down in order to make ourselves feel better, because that's essentially how that racism works. You have to feel good about yourself for being this way. And then because of that, you have to look down on the other people so you can feel better. But we can skip all of that if we have our identity in Christ ultimately. So let's go ahead. Thank you guys all too for your responses to all these questions too. I know it's tough too, because a lot of people are heated about this stuff. It doesn't really matter what you say. People want you to affirm the racism to the max or deny it completely. And if whichever one you do, the other people are going to flip out. You know what I mean? And so, but I think as Christians, I think my goal in this video is for us to provide understanding of why people feel the way they do and that sort of thing too. So that way we're not talking past each other as much. So yeah, so let's go ahead and get to questions in the super chat. You guys go ahead and throw me your questions down below. And I know I missed some super chats. I saw one from where'd it go? I can't find them because they disappeared. Thank you guys all who did send super chats. All I see is one from David Wood. Who's
I was gonna say you might want to block that guy, man.
Yeah, I think so.
Seems like a troublemaker, man. I don't know.
David's funny though, but yeah, it's funny because yeah, we have an inside joke. So every time I talk to him, I call him something that's white. So I'll say like high socks or high teeth or something like that. It's just a funny joke. He says way worse, but we won't get into that. Just kidding. So all right, Benjamin, super chat. Benjamin, another Patreon supporter. Appreciate you, brother. Says first, this Carlton person is amazing, full of wisdom and insight. Please have him on again. Second, how would you like to address prominent evangelicals like James White, who claim if you speak out on this issue, you're preaching a false gospel? Good questions. So Benjamin, and those Carlton too, you guys talk a lot and stuff too, so that's why that's kind of funny. But second, who wants to touch that one with a 10-foot pool? He says, how would you address the prominent evangelists? Okay. Yeah, because I do think that James White, honestly too, when I hear him on social stuff like this, it just seems to be a lot of misunderstandings too. And then to say that it's the false gospel if you speak out on it, I guess I don't have enough knowledge of his work in that aspect to know what he's referring to. I'm assuming that he's saying that you put it in place of the gospel. Is that what he's saying? You guys know?
Yeah, I think that, ultimately, and it's not just James White. I mean, I was kind of joking earlier, but I mean, it could be, because we talk about the guy Ascol and a number of folks that are kind of along those lines who believe that if you're speaking out on quote social justice, that you're preaching a different gospel or something to that effect. And what I would say is that, well, I'll admit some of what I'm going to say, but what I would say is I think that we have to stop doing is lobbing grenades at one another from afar. I think what we need to do is get in proximity with one another and have these real discussions. I think that's first and foremost. I think that James White, quite frankly, I think he's very misinformed on history and a lot of these social issues. It's evident that in areas of like, textual criticism or maybe argumentation related to Muslims, it's evident that he's applied himself in studying those areas. And it's equally evident that he has not applied himself in understanding social issues, particularly in regard to race. It's obvious because he makes very basic mistakes when he tends to address these issues. What I would advise him to do is to spend some time reading people that he may be inclined to disagree with, maybe studying some aspects of history. I would love for him to contact me. I can refer him to some sources, so that he could at least make more educated counterpoints to his interlocutors. I love the guy, and I've told him that to his face that I love him, and I think that he's obviously a believer and a gem to the body of Christ, but he's sorely mistaken with respect to racial issues on a number of counts. I think we need to challenge one another in that regard. So ultimately, in the words of Tony Evans, we need to understand that we're not just communicating the hope of the gospel, but we're also living out the scope of the gospel. And when we talk about the scope of the gospel, you can't live that out without understanding what the Bible has to say about justice and then living that out within your context. And I think that that's all people are really trying to say. And I think that James White has made a habit of strawmanning people who are trying to articulate that point.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. Like if we disagree on the problem, then we're going to disagree on the solutions. That's why communication is so important, right? Because if James White has a different understanding about what's going on than stuff that Black people are saying, then he's going to be addressing something that's, from a different lens and stuff like that. And it leads to miscommunication, and the sound bites and the rhetoric and all this stuff that comes with social media makes all this stuff way worse. You know what I mean?
Helpful. Yeah, it's not helpful at all.
It's not helpful at all. Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, anybody else want to comment on that real quick, or you guys want to go to the next question?
I guess I could just say just a brief thing, because I think Adam pretty much covered a lot. I think just like I said, the other thing would just be looking at the framework that someone looks at the issues through. So like I said, a lot of times when I've heard him speak about it, it's really through this individualistic mindset where basically when someone speaks about justice issues, I guess in his mind, it just comes down to, I'm complaining because this person has more than me. And I don't think you understand, like, that's not, even though maybe some people do, right? But I think for a lot of people, that's not what it comes down to. I think once you start to view it in the broader category of a systemic issue and something that needs reform or something that needs redressing and that hasn't been fixed yet, especially in the history of the country, like I said, I think it just might be a matter of just getting more education on stuff like that. But yeah, I think Adam did a good job.
Can you elaborate a little on that? Just because I notice in a lot of the conversations, people are kind of always kind of going back to the individual aspect,
Yeah.
and then they seem to be missing what the person's talking about when they talk about systemic racism. That sort of thing.
Yeah. So kind of like how I guess in my example before about sort of the individual on individual racism or something like that. But an example of like a systemic issue might be something like the criminal justice system. So let's just use something like marijuana. Where statistics show that Black and white people use marijuana at virtually the same rate, but that Black people get arrested at 4 times the rate and incarcerated at 6 times the rate for that same crime. You know what I mean? Like something where the color of the skin is the independent variable. I think it was a study that was done by the ACLU. And I remember I looked at their methodology for a lot of it. And so, but like that might be an example of something where it's not necessarily one person saying, I don't like Black people, I'm going to get you, but it's like, it's something that's broadly systemic, where something that doesn't seem, something that shouldn't be that way is that way. You know, the Harvard Business School did a study on like resumes where they're virtually identical, and show that if you have a white sounding name, that you're 50% more likely to get a callback for an interview than if you have a Black sounding name. So John Smith is going to be more likely to get an interview than Demetrius Williams, let's say, you know, even if they have the same credentials. You know, there's certain studies that show that when the education level is virtually the same, that you know, the callback rate for white men who have something of a jail record is higher than for Black men without one. Like certain things that take place in institutions or systems that shouldn't be the case, and that seem to have race as a component or at least an influencing factor. You know, that and it shouldn't necessarily be the case, right? And so when you look at something in the case of like a broader systemic issue that doesn't necessarily go down to you know, one person who just says, I don't like Black people and I hate Black people, right? But in terms of a system that acts prejudicially towards a group of people, I think that's part of what, you know, I think people miss the case. So when I'm talking about racism and on a systemic level, and someone else is saying, I don't see any, you know, that person didn't say the N-word, what are you talking about? You know what I mean? The people just talk past each other, but I think that's part of it.
So one thing I'd say to that really quick too, just kind of give 2 cents. In my mind, this is how it goes, because I think that this is why I think these issues are so complex. And this could just be my ignorance on the statistics and that sort of thing as well. But I would assume, for example, that people are probably going to be a lot more apt to hire people that remind them of their grandson or remind them of their son or something like that. So I wouldn't necessarily think that's racist, because I would assume that if you did the statistics in, you know, in Black communities, then they're probably going to hire people that are Black more. Now, I could be wrong on that, but I'm assuming that this is where I'd like to make the distinction between prejudice and racism. So it doesn't mean that it's good or anything like that, but I'm saying instead of this being overt racism, then it could just be prejudice and preference. And I think that that's something you just can't eliminate. You know what I mean? I mean, you can try, but I'm just saying if it's psychologically driven in that sense, where people are prejudiced and stuff like that, the best way to combat it in my mind is for people to be around people that are way different than them, so they can see that those are people that are just like them. But when you have segregation and stuff still in a lot of these places in the South and stuff, makes it a lot harder for that to ever be a something that can be achieved. So.
Yeah, and I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I feel like part of it too is just because I definitely understand, and that's why I would say, that's why I said, like, I didn't say race is a determinative, but as an influencing factor, because there could be myriad factors that play a part in certain things. But at least, like you said, but even let's say if someone, they just say, you know what, I see you and myself, then I still think that might be something of a justice issue, because you know, people don't necessarily have the same opportunity. And I guess you could say that takes place on a lot of different fronts. But like I said, in the broader scope of America and just the history, like a lot of people don't even know what redlining is, you know, where literally banks like prevented Black people from buying houses and property in, you know, nicer neighborhoods, so that it's not like a bunch of Black people just, and I'm not saying that all Black people live in the ghetto, like that's ignorant, but I'm just saying, like, it's not like a lot of people they'll just say, you know what, I want to live in the poorest, most dangerous communities. Like, yeah, that sounds like like people were barred from doing that, and they still live in those redline communities today, you know, with respect to you know, let's say the impact of something like slavery, you know what I mean? And just not being able to buy land. There's a reason why the slaves were promised 40 acres and a mule afterwards, because land is one of the best ways to generate generational wealth that a lot of Black people were barred from doing for a long time. So I kind of use the analogy of, I said, imagine if we're all playing a game of Monopoly and you just say, you know what, we do that. And then I just kick 3 people out of the game I pick 3 people out the game, and then we all play for 3 days. Let's say, and then they come and you say, you know what, no, y'all can come back in now. We done bought up all the property. We done got a lot of the money. And now we just say, hey, what are y'all complaining about? You know, y'all just have as much of a shot as we do. Just work hard. You know what I mean? And it's like, that's a lot. It's a rudimentary example. It's kind of like, that's what America is for a lot of, you know, if you're talking on the grand scale for Black people, you know? And so you're looking at that, and a lot of people are saying, what are you guys complaining about? We're in a new game. It's like, no, we are still dealing with the effects of all this, and it hasn't been redressed, and it's still going on. And so I think a lot of times, like I said, there's this sanitized history, I think, and I'll just say in the white mythos, if you want to call it that, where a lot of times just history is taught us like there was slavery, happened like 100 years ago, it was bad, or not even 100, but I'm saying hundreds of years ago, it was bad. Black people were kind of treated bad. And then, you know, then Martin Luther King gave some speeches a little bit later, and he solved racism. And what are you guys complaining about now? You guys have it good. What are you guys talking about? You know what I mean? And I feel like there's a necessity for education, not only on what happened, but on the effects of these things and how they affect present day. And so I feel like that's one of the things. I think, yeah.
Can I piggyback on that just real quick?
Yeah, real quick though, because we got a lot of super chats to get through too.
Oh, snap.
Yeah, so just to kind of make it clear, it's just like, if anybody who has, you know, believes like the whole MAGA concept, make America great again, they believe that by voting for Donald Trump, he'll be able to put something in place so that tomorrow will be better for, you know, our nation, our kids, and so forth. Well, in the same way that our present day decisions can impact tomorrow, our past decisions impact today. You know, so I think people misinterpret, you know, what happened during the civil rights movement in the sense, okay, well, now we corrected the laws and everything's good, right? Well, it's just like if I grab your hand and leave a bruise, I might let go, but the bruise is still there. We're still dealing with the economic bruises of Jim Crow and slavery and so forth, and that has to be addressed. So just because we don't see, it'd be pretty hard to put something on the books today, but all right, you know, all N-words, you can't buy property. You're not going to see that. But if those bruises are still impacting us today, the question that before America is, what do we do about it?
Yeah. And this is where it's complex, right? Because
absolutely.
Yeah, because there's a lot of different factors. In my mind, I try to break it out. What are the problems outside of the community that could be addressed? What are the problems inside the community? What about the issues of economics? What problems are there? What can we do about those? What about the issue of psychology? What do we do about that? You know what I mean? In the community and out the community and all these other different things. And so that's why, in my mind, at least, a lot of this stuff can get really deep really quick. But that's why it's good we're having these discussions. Super chat real quick from Brandon Rogers says, how would you respond to colorblind theology? We see obvious partiality, but it seems to be ignored. I'm assuming that he's saying like some people will say like you shouldn't see any color if you're a Christian. Is that what you guys understand this question? I mean, yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think that
I don't want to butt in before Alan Parr gets a shot, because I feel like I butted in last time. But
we'll get Alan Parr here in a sec. But I'll just say real quick. To me, like, and this is the thing. I got some comments on videos where people say, "Oh, if you're a real Christian, then you wouldn't even be talking about race or something like that." But I'm like, some things are descriptive for one, right? So like I'm Black. You know what I mean? That's a description. That doesn't mean like you know, I get my identity, or we're saying that everybody. You know what I mean? If you're talking about race, you're just amplifying that up to the max. That's not it. This is a descriptive sense of when we're in this world and in these bodies and all like that too. You know what I mean? And then with that, that's like denying culture or anything like that. You don't have to believe that there are these distinctions. It's not the same thing as elevating them above all things. You know what I mean? So anyways, that's real quick. Go ahead, Parr.
Yeah, so it's funny, earlier, whenever you mentioned, you know, different slogans and things that people will say, you know, that is offensive. We mentioned Black on Black crime. We mentioned, you know, all lives matter, you know, but there's a couple other ones that, you know, one of which is, you know, I don't see color. You know, you have a lot of people who will try to justify that they are not racist because they don't see color, or, you know, the infamous, well, you know, I'm not racist because I have Black friends, you know, or, you know, I had a friend in, you know, on my street when I was in elementary school, and, you know, his name was Jim, and Jim was Black, and, you know, he and I were good friends. And so therefore, because you had a Black friend, you know, 45 years ago on your street, that means that there's no way you could be racist. I mean, it's impossible. I mean, hey, because you had a Black friend like that, you know, that those type of comments. So let's get back to the, I don't see color. So I have to be careful when I say this because I don't want to be too blunt, but I guess I'll be blunt. All right, I'm going to be very blunt. That's a stupid comment. Don't ever say that again, please, because to suggest that you don't see color means you're blind. And so unless you are blind, like physically, but I'm not talking about spiritually, but unless you're physically blind, you do see color. Like I'm looking at this camera in front of me and it's Black. I'm looking at this mic, it's Black, right? So to suggest that you don't see color, number one, is just doesn't make like physical, logical sense, because you see color everywhere else. So why would you not see my color? Second of all, we want you to see our color. We want you to embrace our color, just like I need to embrace somebody else's color. And I need to say, okay, what is it about that color that makes them different? What is different about being Black? So, because if you don't see color, then you aren't willing to open yourself up to learning about different people's experiences, different people's backgrounds. So when I open my eyes and I see color, I'm able to say, okay, brother, let's go out to Starbucks and let me learn about your color. Let me learn about your experience. Let me learn about what it's like to be Black. Let me learn about what it's like to be white. Let me learn about what it's like to be Asian in the United States, because your color of your skin is different than mine. And I want to know you so that when I get to interact with somebody else that's like you, I'll have some framework of what your experience has been. So to say I don't see color is not only not true, but it's just not helpful.
Yeah, and I think too, like that's one of those things too, where people try to ignore just because there's differences. People think that if you see differences, you see a difference in value, right? And that's not at all what it is. People are just like men and women are different. If men are like, can be better at, like, I don't know, playing in the NBA next to, the WNBA or, whatever it is, they're just different. It doesn't mean that they're less valuable because they're different, And so that's like one of those kind of cliches that people say that I think end up being problematic. I gotta hurry up and get to these because they keep disappearing on me.
All right.
Okay. This one from the Holy Place. Oh yeah, Aiden, by the way, I did see your super chat, but yours disappeared on me. Thank you very much, brother. Aiden's a cool kid. The Holy Place says, is racist, in quotes, a racial stereotype? Anybody understand that one?
I don't even know what they're asking.
I think it gets down to, how are you defining racism? How are you defining racist? So I think that would be the whole thing. I don't know if he means that, do we tend to think that certain people are racist? You know what I mean? I guess you can stereotype someone as a racist, or a certain type of group, but I wouldn't say that that's wise. But I think it just depends on what you mean by racist.
Yeah. And at the beginning of this episode too, guys, we talked about the definitions of racism. And I think we all have different understandings of racism, even amongst us four, I think, because I don't think I agree with any of your guys's, which is weird, right? Because you would assume that we would be somewhat on the same page. So that's one of the
you're wrong, John. That's why.
Well, I think it's a contextual. I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I think a lot of times I don't want to say it's a contextual definition, because I guess that's why I think it's so important to define your terms.
Yeah.
Because people just mean different things. And that's why I mean it's such I don't know. I want to say an ambiguous term, but it's just such a term that people mean different things when they say it. So like you said, there's the way you define it. I don't know if I would necessarily say it's strictly institutional. Like, that's why there's attitudinal racism. There's people just mean different things.
Yeah.
But I definitely get what you're saying.
Well, see, I think that's a potential.
So maybe the modifier to
right?
it.
Well, that's the thing. If we're telling people to combat against racism, then we have to be clear about what we mean by racism. That's why I think it's important for like systemic racism and all this stuff too, is because they're hearing something completely different most of the time. And if that's the case, you know what I mean, then we have communication issues. And I did just lose another super chat. It was a blue one, but it went away because it took too long. Very sorry. It was a quote. I mean, it was a scripture. It was John 4 something, I think. So you guys can see.
That was when Jesus was talking to the woman at the well, the Samaritan. I know sometimes that plays a part in these kind of conversations.
Okay. Yeah. But yeah, so hey, thanks for the super chat, man. I'm glad it wasn't a question, and so that way we'll get to the questions. All right, let me keep going. Super chat from Don Lewis says, how do we balance our pursuit for social injustice with biblical command to submit to authorities? Great question. In the U.S., we have, it went away. Anybody else still see it? In the U.S., we have something. I hate this thing sometimes. Sorry. Yeah, okay, let's answer that first question. Sorry, I didn't get the end of your question, Don, but thanks for super chat. Anybody want to answer that? So basically he's just wondering, what do we do when it comes to fighting for justice? And then you have the conflict of like Romans 13, where it says submit to authorities, and also 1 Peter 2, I think it is, or 3, 1 Peter 2 or 3, where it talks about submitting to authorities. How do Christians kind of ride that balance? Anybody got any advice on that?
You see, my perspective is, I mean, I do think you kind of run into some gray areas, but I think it's going to depend on your view of like, the moral scheme that's presented in scripture. What I mean by that is like, in the same way that protecting of life is like a higher order biblical obligation than lying. I mean, think about like Rahab and hiding the spies or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like, did she do wrong by hiding the spies and saying the word there? Well, no, she preserved their lives. So I think there's there's a hierarchy of moral oughts, if you will, moral obligations. And it's the same thing with, I mean, yeah, we do have this obligation of Romans 13 to obey the laws of the land, but I do think that there are instances in which there are competing moral obligations, some of which supersede obeying the laws of the land. So like when, you know, if there's some ordinance against eating at a counter or something like that, and the Imago Dei is being infringed upon by a particular group, African Americans, and Martin Luther King goes to that counter with a bunch of folks to disobey that ordinance, I don't think that he's done something, you know, illicit. I think that he's acted rightly in that instance. So I do think there's room for moral reasoning and whatnot, but I think we have to be careful not to make you know, Romans 13 like this superlative, you know, ethical constraint, whereas there can be competing you know, obligations, you know, in light of what Scripture details throughout.
Yeah, no, I think, yeah, for me, the only condition that I can think of is violating that, the Imago Dei, like you said. Then I think that would be the condition. Other than that, I can't really think of much, but I'm sure there probably are some other situations you can probably think of too. I would get into my kind of theory on justice, but because a lot of this is you're asking questions about justice, but watch my video so that way I don't take time on something like what is justice, or justice is something that I did. It was the sequel to the video I did on the
I think it was called Justice is Dope. No, I'm kidding.
All right. So we got some are fading fast. So let me get to them. So let me see. I took screenshots just in case they were going to go too quick. So let me pull up the screenshot. All right. Question from Yosho Frags. Thank you for the super chat. Says, what are some practical steps that we can take to help the Black community in pursuit of justice and equality? Great question. You guys, let's do these. Let's try to keep them as quick as possible. I can start, I guess. I'd say, actually, go ahead, Adam. Go ahead. You can start.
I'm going to actually repeat the question. I missed it.
Oh, it's okay. What are some practical steps that we can take to help the Black community in pursuit of justice and equality?
Oh, well, I think one of the blessings that we have living in America is that we do have a range of options of how we can exercise our influence. First thing is in your immediate context. If you see something, say something. If you got that uncle at the family cookout talking about N-words, confront them. You know what I'm saying? Because you're going to be a louder voice, a more effective voice in that context than somebody like me ever could. People may disagree with me, but the historical fact is that any racial progress that you see in America, you know, a key component or strategy has always included mobilizing the moderate white evangelical, you know what I'm saying, because they occupy a space in our society that just gives them a vantage point to confront racism that somebody who looks like me doesn't necessarily have. And so your voice is very valuable in that regard. Secondly, just on a practical note, get involved in local government. Don't wait 4 years, you know, to cast a ballot and think everything's going to be okay. This goes for everybody. Get involved in your local government, know your sheriff, know your police chief, know their philosophy, go to the city council meetings. From there on up, make sure you're engaging in civic affairs so that not just for Black people, but just for people in general, you can be affecting godly change and really living out that just life.
Absolutely. Alan Parr, do you have something on that or no?
Yeah, it's funny. I was looking through my phone because I had taken some notes on this for what I did on my channel a couple of days ago. And I kind of, you know, that question came up on mine as well. So how can I, as a white person, you know, do some things that will practically help, you know, the situation, African-American community and whatnot. And pretty much basically similar to Carlton. I mean, I wrote down a couple things. Number one, acknowledge the problem. Because I think that it's got to start right there. It has to start with that because you have a lot of people that still don't think there is a problem. And so if they don't really educate themselves to be open enough to see, okay, there's a problem here, then there's no way they're ever going to think that they need to do anything to actually help or make a difference or be part of the solution. So that would be the first thing. And then also, you know, weep with those who weep. We talked about that, right? So, you know, when you see your brother and sister who's African-American and they're going through a difficult time, just, you know, be there for them and show genuine human Christian love towards them. Now, I can talk all day about how we as African-Americans need to respond differently sometimes whenever our white brothers and sisters try to show that concern, and maybe they don't have the right words or they don't know what to say, but they're trying to show genuine concern. And you have a lot of Black people that'll just shoot them down on social media and say, well, you can't understand me, so why you don't have the right to speak out on this. This is not concerning you. And I think that is totally wrong. I think for African Americans to do that, that is going to now shoot them down and basically cause them to be like, well, I'm never going to share out anything ever before, because last time I did that, Black people told me I couldn't speak up. And then we get mad at them whenever they're silent during these times. That's a whole nother issue. But I think another one, and I'll just leave it with this, is shift from not being racist to being anti-racism. There's a big difference, right? We can wave a flag all day and say, I'm not racist, and be proud of that and think that my responsibility is done because I'm not a racist. But that's good. Now let's take it a step further. How can I now be anti-racist? How can I now be anti-racism? How can I be an advocate against that? And the last thing I would say would be, because I lied, last thing I said would be, I'm a preacher too, so Adam, so I feel you. Talk to your kids, talk to your children about this. Like, help them understand what's going on and why it's wrong to treat people a different way, because the future of this world and this country is really in the hands of our kids. And it's up to us to make sure that we educate them and train them properly.
Cool. Good one. Let's keep going, guys. We're just going to have one person respond to one question, or each question probably, so we can make sure we get through this quick. Super chat from Drake Smith. Thank you for super chat. Says, no one has a solution outside of wanting certain politicians elected to office, even though they have no solutions outside of calling their opponents racist. That's a good point. What do you guys think is the solution? Very good point. I'll just be very, very, very brief on this, because I could talk about this a lot, but I think that the issue is that we have to understand the problem correctly. What are these causal factors, these causal mechanisms that lead to this injustice, whatever that looks like? Because that's what I think I get frustrated too with a lot of these conversations, is that when people don't define their terms, and like how we just realized all of us are saying something different when we talk about racism, and then what somebody says by systemic racism and somebody else hears something different. With that, how do we solve the problem when everybody's on different pages? So that's why I think we have to, everybody needs to value, obviously, facts and statistics, value the truth. Lovers of truth as Christians, we should be lovers of truth. And then from that, be able to have these open, honest conversations too. So that way we can actually start making some solutions. Because if people can't identify the problem, they're not going to be able to offer you a solution. That's why politics is all these buzzwords and all this stuff. All that stuff doesn't help. It doesn't fix the problem. But for a practical solution, I'd say that with a lot of these issues that we see just regarding the Black community and stuff like this too. I can go through a bunch of stuff, but what I'd say really quick is that the church, I think, is an essential part of the transformation inside of these communities as well too. And I think discipleship and stuff. So the church being able to help people get on their feet and stuff, and then have the individual discipleship. And then we have Black people that grow up to become cops and people in office and the government and all these different things too. So that way we do have more of a say in a lot of these things, and then we have more equality. So I think teaching our Black children and stuff, the importance of opportunity too, and what kind of opportunities they have, because a lot of them don't believe that they have a lot of opportunities, because the only Black people they see that make it out the hood are entertainers, right? They're like, well, I can't rap, I can't dance, I can't be funny, so therefore there's no opportunity for me, you know what I mean? And so you have problems like this too. So it starts in the home. Educate your kids. That's what I would say to that. Somebody can do another one, but just be real fast about it. Anybody else want to add to that, or you guys good? All right, cool. Let's go to the next one. From Marilyn Murphy says, I believe, thank you for the super chat, by the way, Marilyn. Says, I believe MLK said it best when he talked about telling a bootless man to pull himself by his own bootstraps. Who wants to take that one? I believe Martin Luther King said it best when he talked about telling a bootless man to pull himself up by his bootstraps.
I think it's just talking about sort of recognizing the systemic impacts of something. Like I said, sort of like the monopoly analogy, if I can speak right now, and just saying sort of, we got to redress a lot of the things that are causing this, you want to call it opportunity divide, or however you want to call it. But I think that's just kind of what she's talking about. I would agree.
Cool. All right. Next one from Mark Gilmore says, what do you think about white privilege? Is it a constructive tool to combat racism? Thanks, guys. Who wants to take that one?
I don't know if there's a brief answer for that one.
Yeah, I
man.
don't know. That's a tough answer for
Like,
you.
bro.
You know, let me say this just real quick. I'll attack the definitional part. So I think when people hear that term white privilege, I don't normally use it, only because it's like an immediate trigger, and then nobody hears it, anything the rest of what you say. But if you're understanding white privilege, nobody's saying that like you didn't work hard for what you have, or you didn't, do anything of any merit. I don't think that's what people are saying. I think that what people are saying is that there are, whether we like it or not, if you just study the history, you know what I'm saying? There's no doubt that there is a intersection between race and where wealth is and where power is in the society. In the U.S., our original naturalistic, I'm going to get that word wrong, but in order to be a citizen, you had to be a free white male in the United States initially. You know what I'm saying? So right from the outset, you have this, intermingling between race and power. I think that people, they may not like it, but I would just encourage them to not take my word for it, study it out. And I think maybe that'll give them a better vantage point for which to grapple with that question themselves.
And just recognize, I know you said one person, but just, I think the same thing is that whenever the term white privilege comes up, like you said, it's a trigger word. And I think a lot of it just has to do with, I think, because there are some people that do act like this, I'm not going to act like they don't exist, who are like way far left, but that is sort of, like you said, it invalidates their hard work and that it invalidates their struggle. And so if somebody, a lot of times when we use a word like white privilege, we're not saying that white people can't struggle, not saying that white people don't work hard and that they didn't earn what they get a lot of times, just saying that, like how Adam said, just historically, there are certain privileges that being white has in America. There are certain other places where there are other privileges, I guess economically, things tend to favor men in that aspect. I think the judicial system tends to favor women in certain respect when it comes to being pushed for color. Like, there are certain privileges. And so recognizing that when people are talking about white privilege, they're not trying to invalidate your hard work or invalidate the struggle that you go through, but it's just talking about something that's statistical and something that's grounded in history.
Cool. Oh, yeah. And let me just add real quick. I want to be very clear that when we mention anything related to privilege, let's just take the word white out of it. Anything related to privilege, this isn't something that anybody should feel guilty about. Like, this is a reality, but it's not a bad thing. What I mean by that is, like, is there such thing as male privilege in our country? Yeah, of course there is. I mean, there's certain things that if you're a man, you're going to be seen a certain way versus women. It's the reality, right? But does that mean I should go around with my head down feeling guilty because I'm a man versus a woman? No, I shouldn't feel guilty. I should just acknowledge that, yes, there are certain privileges that come along with being a man, right? Or
same for women, right? Same for women too, right?
Exactly. I mean, this isn't a negative thing. It's just acknowledging that, yeah, I'm a man and there's certain privileges that come along with that. Like Carlton said, there's all sorts of privileges, right? It could be a privilege for being an athlete. If you're a professional athlete, it's not a bad thing that you have certain privileges. Just acknowledge it. Yeah, I have certain privileges. And that is what it is. It's not bad.
This one actually probably be best suited for you too, because I think it kind of triggers off of your response to, well, I'll just read it. This is from Maverick Christian, my boy Wade. Wade, what it do, man? Wade is he's brilliant, man. Great thinker. You guys sub to his channel too. Says, what do you think people mean by I don't see color? If not, I don't discriminate on the basis of color. See, now this can be the reverse of what we were talking about, where we understood it to be a certain way, but they meant it a different way. You see? So I think what he's saying is that people are just saying that I'm not racist when they say I don't see color, or saying I don't discriminate. They don't mean I can't literally see you. He's just saying that they don't discriminate. Any quick thought on that?
Yeah, real quick. I just think that because race is such a tension point in our country, in our world, that you shouldn't take a chance at saying something that could be taken one way or another, right? So if you want to say I'm not a racist, just come out and say that. If you want to say I don't discriminate on the basis of color, then say that. But don't say I don't see color, because that could be taken in a way that makes people like, wait, that's confusing. What do you mean you don't see color? I mean, this is black, that's blue, that wall is white. That doesn't make sense. So just say, let your yes be yes, or no be no. Like, say what you really are trying to say so that it's very clear, versus saying something else that really, you may mean it one way, somebody else may take it a different way.
Yeah. And that's what we've been saying all night, right? The whole kind of point of all this conversation is so that way we can all try to get more so on the same page. Super chat from Greg Olson. Thank you for the super chat. Says, are you familiar with Jesse Lee Patterson and his views? For example, he related to how he and other blacks were successful even back in the day of Jim Crow. He wants to focus on self-improvement. How are views so different between some blacks? That's a good question. I think too, you have like the Candace Owens and all that too, and you hear these different things, and so it is confusing, right? Like, especially if you're not intimately familiar with the statistics, which I'm not intimately familiar with the statistics yet. I'm still trying to sort through them and stuff, but that is confusing, right? Because they say the statistics don't support this stuff at all, and you can do it. And the other side says, well, the statistics do support this, and then there is a divide. So let's go ahead and Carlton, I saw you were ready.
Yeah. Well, one, I just want to say Jesse Lee Peterson also described slave ships as riding coach. So I think I take some of what he says, but I get what he's saying though, and that's why whenever we talk about these things, I don't ever want to make it seem as though I'm like preaching a defeatist mentality, or what some of my conservative brothers and sisters call a victimhood mentality, right? I'm not saying that it's not possible for Black people to progress. I'm saying that as a Christian and seeing instances of injustice and the occurrence of injustice, that we as Christians should oppose that. And that's whether it's on behalf of Black people, women, if white people are being discriminated to get like any sort of injustice, is something that Christians should stand against. But yeah, I get Jesse Lee Peterson. Like I said, he has some theological issues. I think he teaches like Christian perfectionism. And then also, like I said, when you say something as ignorant as slave ships were like coach, it's kind of hard for me to take you seriously with respect to certain things, when like millions of people died. But I guess that's kind of my thoughts on that initially.
I'm going to piggyback on that with something I think inflammatory. Oh, you know what? I forgot. You said it was.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Well, just somewhat inflammatory, not really, but I think one mistake that people make, number one, Black people aren't all a monolith. So in terms of how can there be differences in the Black community, it's because we're like everybody else. We have different opinions and different perspectives, even on this panel. So that answers that part. But with respect to Jesse Lee Peterson, whether it be him, whether it be Candace Owens, whether it be what's the other dude?
Larry Elder.
Oh no!
Larry Elder. Yeah, exactly.
We all know him, man.
Let me just give you a caution. Just please, just hear me out, right? Sometimes people feel most comfortable with the Black person who's articulating what's in line with their conservative perspective. And they assume that people who are in a disagreement with those individuals must be leftists. What I'm saying is there are people like myself who are somewhere in the middle who you could probably have a productive conversation with. Anybody on this panel, you could probably have a productive conversation with, but still would not see, Larry Elder, Candace Owens, Jesse Lee Peterson. Those aren't the only Black voices that are of merit. And so I would encourage individuals to maybe press past just the few voices that they're aware of, and maybe venture into some people that they may not necessarily have heard of. Do some research out there. But Candace Owens is not the Black voice. I'm saying she's not the only voice of reason. I'll just leave that. I'll just leave that there. You know what I'm saying? But there's other intelligence. If I hear one more person in a conversation ask me, "Have I read Thomas Sowell?" I'm gonna scream. I swear. Yes, I've read some Thomas Sowell. I haven't read all of it, but come on, man, he's not the only Black intellectual out there, y'all. Come on, y'all. Let's make sure that we're treating every community in such a way that we acknowledge it's not a monolith, and stretch ourselves by not just listening to those we agree with, but maybe grappling with people with whom we have some tension.
Yeah, and were you saying too? Let me make sure I understood your point, because if so, I just want to reiterate it. Were you saying that when they give for example, there's not too many Black commentators for like a lot of Fox and stuff like that. There's not too many, right? And so they when they do have somebody that's outspoken that seems to go against the kind of typical Black mindset, then they would elevate those people to be like more voices that are stronger. And what you're just trying to say is there's a lot more voices out there, right?
Well, I'm saying there's more voices, and to be more pointed, what I am saying is that from what I can tell, I could be wrong, but as far as voices that have that sort of platform, I don't know any of those voices that are consistent in articulating their perspective from a specifically biblical worldview. Right. And I think that we have to be careful not just to agree with folks because they agree with us, but press towards that biblical worldview. And I think that there are other voices who do that better than some of the voices that people tend to be most comfortable with.
Gotcha. Cool. Jacob Brown says this conversation's been fire. Jacob Brown's another dude I know. That's cool. Good to see you, man. Or good to read from you, man. Appreciate that. Guys, so one more question that I think is probably pretty important, because I keep getting this conversation a lot too in my conversations, is I think a lot of non-Black people are confused on how they should feel, right? Like, should they feel guilty? This kind of goes back to the kind of the white privilege thing a little bit, but should they feel guilty? And then I've had people say, well, like, I don't think I'm racist. So like, is there something I'm missing? Like, you know what I mean? So I think there's a lot of confusion about how they should feel and how they know they're racist. And then they're just kind of confused at this whole kind of situation, because I'd say 5 years ago, it seemed like a lot of the Christian voices were just firmly on the side of saying racism's a myth, but then now with this situation, I think it's because the death was so kind of clear that it wasn't murder, and not, I wouldn't say that it was overly clear that it was like racially motivated or whatever. I'm not talking about that aspect, but I'm just saying because it was so clear and everybody saw it, people's minds have just suddenly changed. And now people are a lot more open to the other perspectives. So I think they're kind of confused and they're trying to understand. So what would you guys say to somebody that wonders how they should feel? I see Alan Parr's on it. Go ahead, bro.
Yeah. So, this goes back to the question that we talked about earlier when we said, why is it that some people feel like racism does exist and some people don't? And I think for a lot of people that may say, well, racism doesn't exist, check yourself on that. And maybe the motivation behind that is, if I can say or prove that racism doesn't exist, then I can kind of in some way exonerate myself from ever feeling guilty about it, right? But if I have to acknowledge that racism exists, then that means, oh no, I, as a white person, have to now feel guilty because my black friends are being prejudiced against or whatever. So let me try to prove that it doesn't exist so I don't have to experience guilt. So let me just try to set some of my friends free for this, right? Like when something negative happens to an African-American, how should you feel? Okay. You should feel the same way that if something happens to a white friend or someone in your white community, because particularly if you're talking from a Christian perspective, it shouldn't matter what color the person is. As Carlton said earlier, injustice is injustice, right? So, so what was I going to try to say? Basically, in terms of how you should feel, you should feel a sense of sadness and remorse anytime injustice of any kind happens. Now, guilty. Should you feel guilty? Only you know in your heart whether or not you should feel guilty and what is causing those feelings of guilt. So could it be that deep in your heart you have certain opinions of people that are of another race, like you feel like they're inferior or whatever, right? Only you know that. So if you're feeling a sense of guilt, check your heart. Ask yourself, like, do the work and figure out, okay, what is it why am I feeling this way? But if you can't come up with anything and you feel like, what, I treat people good, I feel like God's created everybody equal, then don't take on the guilt of something that your forefathers and your ancestors did in slavery days and stuff, because you weren't there at that time and you didn't have anything to do with that. And you shouldn't feel guilty about those type of things. You should only feel guilty about maybe what's going on in your heart right now as it relates to how you relate to other people and other races. That's my perspective.
Can I shake some things up right quick? Can I do that right quick?
Yep, go ahead.
Add a little hot sauce in here. So, I agree with everything that the brother just said. I think one missing element, just kind of doing a little analytic philosophy here. I think sometimes we frame the discussion around guilt when really, I think we're dealing, let's just be explicit, like white guilt, when I think really sometimes what we're dealing with is white shame. And there's a real distinction between guilt and shame. Guilt is something where you're culpable and you ought to feel guilty. Shame, you can feel ashamed for something that wasn't, your responsibility. If you got raped or something like that, you might feel ashamed, but it's not that you did anything wrong. And so I think sometimes for people who have propped themselves up on maybe some sort of nationalistic identity, and so on July 4th, they're rejoicing in all the goods that America has done, and then they hear something negative about America, in the same way that they feel, that positive connection to America, then they feel the shame from their predecessors. And what I want to say is that the Bible can address both through the gospel, right? I mean, because obviously Christ absolves us of that guilt, by grace through faith. And in terms of shame, we should be building our identity upon Christ in the first place. And so if you find yourself, dealing with that sort of shame, I would encourage you to dislodge your self-concept from this nationalistic or ethnistic foundation, put it on the foundation of Jesus Christ, and then you can better address these issues. And what you'll find is that you then are freed up to have the right responses when you see, these ill things in society. That's my snippet version of it. But,
Cool. All right, guys, we're going to be wrapping up here because it's getting kind of late. So I just want to kind of reiterate too, we recapped a lot today, guys. So if you guys missed a lot, make sure you go ahead and watch the full stream. And the point of this stream too was to provide understanding more for people. So it's not that we all have to agree on everything, because I don't really care where you sit politically. It's nothing like that. But I hope that what we can do is increase understanding and talks amongst brothers and sisters, so that way we can understand their perspective, so that way we can start providing more adequate solutions to the divisions in the church. So I want to thank all of my guests for coming on. You guys are all my boys. I love all three of you guys, and appreciate you guys and your perspectives too. Thank you guys for all the super chats, and somebody go ahead and drop the links to Adam and Alan's channels in the comments, and then I'll also update it in the description. I forgot to do it before the live stream, but I'll do that afterwards too. So yeah, I think that's about it. So anything else you guys want to say real quick before we go?
I was just going to add one thing. Sorry, Adam. I was just going to say, I know some people were talking about some things I can do. I just wanted to add just one thing is people can do is listen. I think that's just something that first thing you got to do is, even before you diagnose a problem, you have to be aware of it. And that can happen if you don't listen. So I feel like listening is one thing. Two, I know sometimes some of my white brothers and sisters, even there are a lot of Black people that don't know a lot of stuff about this. So I would say one thing to do is educate yourself on it. So just some good books. I think two that are from a Christian perspective. One is called Free at Last, The Gospel in the African American Experience by Dr. Carl Ellis Jr. And then The Color of Compromise, The Truth About the American Church's Complicity and Racism. It kind of just gives sort of a historical thing. Also, Divided by Faith, Evangelical Religion and the Problem of Race in America is a good book that has some things about that. Something about criminal justice. The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander is a good book. And then Just Mercy. I think this was just turned into a movie by Brian Stevenson, is another really good book. But if you're looking for reading, we're all quarantined. Some people are furloughed. You just want to learn something about it. Might be a good time to do it now. But I would say, and also like Adam said, get involved in local government, because that is really, really, really important. So that's what I would say.
Yeah. Alan Parr, any last words real quick?
No, I just want to say thanks for having us on. Thanks for setting this up, John. This is a good conversation, and hopefully all of us are just, allowing our minds to be enlightened, and things are churning. We're learning, and that's really what it's all about. It's just exposing ourselves to different people's perspectives. So thanks so much for having us on.
Yeah, absolutely, brother. And Adam Coleman.
Yeah, real quick, man. Just want to read a quick verse. This is Ephesians chapter 4, verse 25. I've been seeing a lot of people talking about this week in regard to the riots, be angry and sin not. But I want you to, that's verse 26. Take a look at the verse before. It says, therefore, each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor, for we are all members of one body. These are very intense discussions. And I think that what we have to do is make sure that we're speaking the truth in love. You know what I'm saying? As the scripture requires to. We need to not sweep this under the rug. I think that the best opportunity for America to overcome its race issue is through the church. Given that there's one Lord, one faith, one baptism, we have the bond of peace and the bond of love that I think should put us on footing such that we can engage these difficult discussions and model for the world what it really looks like to be in Christ. Because Jesus said that they will know that you're my disciples, based upon how you love one another. We need to love each other, y'all. And if I love you, I'm gonna tell you the truth, and I ought to be able to receive the truth as well. And so I hope that these discussions will continue. Thanks, John, for having me, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
I appreciate all you guys too, and you guys have some really good insights. And it's been good to have this conversation, man. We should have more conversations like this too. It's been good. So love you guys, and love all of you out there wherever you guys are. Stay safe, stay blessed. And what do you mean? What do you mean?
What do you mean?
What do you mean?
Who has the best? What do you mean? Go ahead.
What do you mean?
What about? I can do a smooth one.
That was probably a good one right there.
I do Billy D. Williams. What do you mean?
What do you mean? All right. Love you guys, everybody. Good night. You guys stay safe out there, and thanks for coming on. All right. Talk to you guys later. Getting the end. It's not ended yet. Doesn't look like.
Let's go another hour, man.
I hit end and it's just spinning.
Could you not tarry 5 hours?
Oh no. Trying to end stream. Just spinning. There we go. Now here's my pop-up. Are you want to